Tio-tu is a clueless, inexperienced guy who's never been in a relationship, so he's often mocked and ignored by the whole class. But the moment his childhood friend confesses that she likes him, all those who dislike him suddenly show up and give him a hard time. After that, they threw him into the river and left him to drown. As he was slowly sinking underwater, Tio-tu discovered a glowing cube at the bottom of the lake. After touching it, he was granted immense power, allowing him to take revenge on those who bullied him and eventually rule the entire world. But hold on, let's rewind to the beginning. Tio-tu is attending a class reunion with his classmates and the group is playing Jenga. It's Shendao's turn to pull a block. When her eyes accidentally meet Tio-tu's, she gets so flustered that she knocks over the tower. According to the rules, whoever topples the tower has to reveal a secret, so the group urges her to say Krat's name. Tio-tu immediately smiles when he hears that. Their friends burst out laughing too, because there's no way someone as beautiful as Shendao would like a background character like him. But to everyone's surprise, she openly admits that she really does like Tio-tu. She emphasizes that she's not joking because she's liked him ever since they first met back in middle school. Tio-tu is stunned because for him, having Shendao confess her feelings is like a real-life fairy tale. This should have been the happiest day of his life, but right after the gathering ended, Tio-tu was kidnapped and beaten to a pulp by the riverbank. He had never met these guys before, but the ringleader, Sunjun, actually had feelings for Shendao. After finding out that she liked Tio-tu, instead of accepting defeat and moving on, he decided to kidnap Tio-tu, drag him to the riverbank and ordered his gang to threaten to slit his throat. Tio-tu realized that Sunjun was the leader of a notorious gang and remembered that he often harassed Shendao. Oh, so you get the idea. But faced with such overwhelming numbers, he had no idea how to fight back. Sunjun immediately made a video call to Shendao using Tio-tu's phone and forced her to witness his miserable state. She was extremely terrified by what Sunjun was doing, but Tio-tu shouted at him to let her go because he didn't want her to worry about him. However, he insisted on making her watch the scene of Tio-tu being brutally beaten. He mocked Tio-tu as a loser, saying that he wasn't worthy of someone as perfect as Shendao. Then, he ordered Tio-tu to swear that he would never have anything to do with Shendao again, or else he would throw him into the river. Tio-tu could have chosen the easy way out by swearing to stay away from Shendao, but he would never betray her like that. Instead, he slammed his head hard into the guy holding him. The headbutt was so unexpectedly forceful that the man holding Tio-tu accidentally let go and Tio-tu actually tumbled into the river. Tontuan panicked because he never intended to kill Tio-tu, he just wanted to scare him into backing off. He frantically called out Tio-tu's name, but there was no response. That meant Tio-tu was probably dead and Tontuan had just committed murder right in front of Shendao. Meanwhile, underwater, Tio-tu was slowly sinking. He made no effort to save himself because if he couldn't protect the one he loved, then what was the point of living anyway? As his life flashed before his eyes, Tio-tu recalled the memory of the day he ran away after being propositioned. By middle school standards, that action immediately ruined his reputation. To make matters worse, he happened to overhear two girls bad-mouthing him and calling him a crybaby. As time passed and the school day ended, everyone gradually left, leaving only Tio-tu sitting there dejectedly by himself. At that moment, Shendao walked out of the school gate but immediately stopped when she saw him. She walked over and asked, "What's wrong?" Since Tio-tu stayed silent, she guessed he had forgotten his umbrella and offered to share hers with him, so the two of them walked home together. Tio-tu refused because he said he could go home by himself, but Shendao reminded him that it was still raining and if he went without an umbrella, he would definitely get soaked. Tio-tu realized that Shendao was right, but he still stubbornly insisted that he could just wait until the rain stopped. She burst out laughing because she thought he was being silly, but then she noticed that Tio-tu's hand was injured. She immediately asked, "Can you let me take a look?" At first, Tio-tu refused, but Shendao patiently explained that she just wanted to help him bandage it. Finally, he agreed. She carefully put a band-aid on his wound, then blew a kiss on it and said that doing so would help it heal faster. At that very moment in his mind, Tio-tu imagined the next 50 years of his life with Shendao. He thanked her for helping him, and from that moment on, the two of them were inseparable. Back to the present, Tio-tu suddenly woke up in the water and noticed a beam of light coming from the bottom of the river. He had sunk too deep to swim back to the surface before drowning, so he decided to risk it and dive down to see what it was. At the bottom of the river, Tio-tu found a small glowing cube. He reached out to pick it up and immediately the cube was activated and merged into his body. Suddenly, Tio-tu felt an intense pain spreading throughout his body. The next moment he was transported out of the water, hurled straight into a spatial tunnel and thrown into the center of the giant cube. When he regained consciousness, Tio-tu panicked because just a second ago he had been drowning. Although relieved to find himself alive, he had no idea what was going on. "Where am I and who is this?" At that moment, a strange system appeared before him and announced that Tio had the ability to draw a circle with a 15-meter radius around himself. Within this area, he could teleport to any point in the blink of an eye. Tio thought he must have been seriously drugged to be flying like this because he didn't believe in teleportation. But right after that, his body was suddenly pulled away. He appeared in mid-air, right above the canal. Tio panicked once again because he was very high up and was terrified that he might fall at any moment and wouldn't be able to save himself. But then he realized he was floating and completely safe. After regaining his composure, he looked down at the ground and saw Tuan desperately searching for him in the water below. He was afraid that he might have killed Tio. Watching that scene, Tio found it rather amusing, but just a few seconds later, he was transported to a new location. Meanwhile, Tuan suddenly had the feeling that someone had just been watching him from above. He immediately asked his underlings if anyone had heard anything strange, but they just thought he was a bit paranoid. Even so, Tuan still felt uneasy and ordered them to continue searching for Tio. Meanwhile, Tio was transported to an empty classroom in his school. At this point, he believed he really could teleport, and it wasn't just because he was high anymore, but he still didn't understand why he had this ability. Suddenly, the system spoke up and told him that he had just continuously activated his teleportation power. Tio was startled and worried that maybe it really was because of the papaya leaf, since he suddenly heard a voice in his head, but the system immediately clarified that it wasn't in his head, but inside his body. Such useful information, please be considerate, he shouted at it, telling it to get out of his body. However, the system ignored him and warned that someone was approaching. A school staff member was heading toward the classroom because they heard strange noises inside. But when he opened the door, he only saw an empty room with a puddle of water on the floor. At this moment, Xiao had already teleported back home. He decided to take a shower to relax his mind. After showering, he took out his phone and was surprised to find that it was still working normally even though it had sunk to the bottom of the river with him. The first thing Xiao did was call Shendao to let her know he was still alive. As soon as she picked up, Shendao anxiously asked if he was okay. Xiao reassured her that he was fine, but Shendao angrily criticized Sunjun for going too far and asked Xiao if he wanted to call the police. In fact, Shendao should have called the police right when she witnessed Xiao being pushed into the river, but he just said it wasn't necessary. He had managed to escape without Sunjun noticing, so at this moment Sunjun was probably still frantically searching for his body in the river, anxiously worrying about the number of days he would soon have to count down. Since so much had happened today, Xiao advised Shendao to get some rest and then hung up. After that, he lay down on the bed and wondered what he should do about this system, because even if he told someone, no one would believe him. Suddenly the system appeared again and asked Xiao if he had calmed down yet. He asked why it kept following him, but the system reminded him that it had already become a part of his body, so even if he wanted to, he couldn't escape from it. After that, the system activated the cube and Xiao was sucked inside once again. At this point, the system explained that it had established a connection with his body, which meant that Xiao was now the user of the Hera Cube system and also its host. Xiao still hadn't processed all the information, so he asked the system why it would help someone like him. The system replied that it wanted to help him fulfill his dream. Xiao still didn't quite understand, so he asked again, and this time the system answered that it was his dream of becoming the king of the world. Xiao tried practicing instant teleportation with the system, but before long he was completely exhausted and even almost ended up flying off the rooftop. The system announced that its reserve energy was running low, so teleportation would be limited to once per minute. Xiao decided to temporarily stop practicing instant teleportation, since it would be terrible if he ran out of mana while 1,000 feet up in the air. The system said there was another safer way for him to practice, since in theory he could see everything within a 15-meter radius. Xiao decided to give it a try, and thanks to his new ability, he could see his own bedroom, a couple lying on a bed, and the neighbor next door while she was in the bathtub. Feeling as if his conscience had just returned from hell, Xiao stopped using his ability in front of his apartment building and tried looking around the garden instead, but he became frightened when he saw a civet cat staring intently at him. Xiao collapsed to the ground, and the system warned that if he kept using his teleportation and extrasensory abilities like this, he would soon run out of energy. Although he was a newcomer, Xiao had pretty good control over his powers. However, his body was not yet used to expending so much energy, so in the end, he fainted. A few hours later, Xiao woke up in bed and realized that he had probably overtrained last night, so he decided to be more careful from now on. The system had brought him back to his room after he lost consciousness because he needed more rest. Xiao suddenly realized that he could no longer hear the system's voice in his head, so he asked what was going on. The system explained that maintaining a connection with Xiaotu's body also consumed energy, and it couldn't let him ascend due to exhaustion, because if that happened, it would have to reincarnate along with him. Xiaotu thought that made sense, but he still couldn't believe that he actually had superpowers. He tried searching online for information about superpower cubes, but unfortunately, there weren't any Indian bros making tutorial videos, so he'd have to figure it out on his own. Right at that moment, he received a message from Shen Dao asking if he wanted to have lunch with her the next day. At first, Xiaotu felt really excited, but then he remembered what Sanjun had done to him and swore that he would make him pay. However, now was not the time, because if he ran out of mana before he could even make a move, that would be a disaster. He asked the system if there was any way to help him increase his strength. The system replied that there was a built-in auto-enhancement function, basically meaning Xiaotu could become stronger by absorbing gems. Excited, he asked what kind of gem he needed to use for an upgrade. And the system answered that he could even use regular stones. In theory, any stone can contain energy inside, but you'll have a higher chance of success if you use stones like the precious charismatic block on the shelf or your mother's priceless diamond ring. Tiotu thought he could use those expensive gemstones to upgrade the system, but the system told him not to worry because in fact, those stones didn't even contain enough energy. However, the system had found a gemstone outside that seemed to contain enough energy to provide a significant upgrade. Tiotu asked where that stone was and the system replied that it was in the garden on the lower floor. Without hesitation, Tiotu immediately teleported downstairs with a shovel in hand. He wondered where he should start digging, but the system encouraged him to find it on his own using his sensory abilities. It was worth a try, so he closed his eyes and began scanning the area. Finally, he sensed something near the base of a tree, so he went over and started digging. He found it hard to believe because this stone really did have energy inside, even though it just looked like an ordinary bright orange pebble, but the system assured him that this stone could be used for upgrading. Tiotu asked what the next step was, and the system told him to place the stone into the internal cube. Tiotu stepped into the cube space and pressed the stone against the wall. A few seconds later, the stone was absorbed. He was surprised that it actually worked and he began to feel a stream of energy flowing into his body. The system explained that the energy from the stone had increased Tiotu's strength by 2 points and his stamina by 1 point. If he continued to absorb gemstones, he could significantly improve his combat abilities. The next morning, Tiotu's alarm clock rang. He got out of bed still feeling sleepy because he had spent the whole night hunting for gemstones. Suddenly, he remembered that he had to go to school today, so he hurriedly got ready and ran to class a few minutes later. As soon as he arrived, Shen Dao immediately questioned him to get to the bottom of what had happened the previous night, but then she realized the whole class was staring at her and teasing her about having admitted she liked Tiotu. Right at that moment, the classroom became chaotic because Tontuan had just appeared, and the first thing he did after arriving was order his underlings to pick someone from the buffet forest to show off their strength. It was clear that Tontuan had broken into the school because he was looking for Tiotu. Tam Dao looked worried, but Tiotu reassured her to stay calm and then returned to his seat. Tontuan heard that Tiotu was still alive, so he went straight to the front of the class and demanded to know where he was. The moment Tontuan mentioned Tiotu's name, the whole class immediately turned to look at him. They're all such busybodies. He tried to ignore it, hoping Tontuan would give up and leave, but Tontuan spotted him and started walking up the stairs toward him. It seemed that unless there was a little martial arts showdown, Tiotu wouldn't be able to sleep peacefully tonight. But with his new abilities, he could take on the whole lot of them, so what was there to be afraid of? Just to be sure, he asked the system what his chances of winning were, and the system replied that victory would be easy, since the average combat stat of a normal person here was 5, while Tiotu's current stat was 22. Suddenly, Shen Dao tried to persuade Tontuan to stop because she didn't want Tiotu to get hurt, but Tontuan just walked over to her and started insulting him. She told him to leave immediately, but Tiotu could no longer swallow his anger. He stood up and apologized to Shen Dao for letting Tontuan harass her all this time, but now he would take care of this matter. Tontuan felt insulted that Tiotu dared to think he could handle him on his own. He grabbed the collar of his shirt and threatened to beat him to a pulp. However, Tiotu grabbed his hand and squeezed so hard that Tontuan had to reconsider his decision for the moment. Tiotu said that if he continued to harass him and Shen Dao, he wouldn't hesitate to take them all down. Tontuan was still trying to figure out what Tiotu had taken to have such strength, but right at that moment, the homeroom teacher appeared and told Tontuan and his gang to leave the classroom because they weren't supposed to be there. Tontuan didn't want to be dragged away by the authorities, so he agreed to withdraw, but before leaving he whispered in Tiotu's ear and said that if he didn't want anything to happen to Shen Dao, he had to come to the Beicheng basketball court tonight. Tontuan left, and Shen Dao asked what Tontuan had said, but Tiotu just replied that it wasn't important. Coincidentally, he said his head suddenly hurt, so he might skip school today. Meanwhile, at the Beicheng basketball court, Tontuan still couldn't understand how Tutu was strong enough to grip his wrist so hard it left bruises. But he thought it was just a fluke because there was no way Tutu worked out that hard at the gym. He swore he would make Tutu pay for embarrassing him. A while later, Tutu arrived at the basketball court and loudly asked where Tontuan was. He spotted him sitting on the highest row of seats in the stands. Tontuan burst out laughing, thinking that this time Tutu couldn't escape and had no chance of winning this match since he had never intended to play one-on-one. He planned to ambush Tutu, bringing a whole gang to give him a massage. The system warned that things looked tough this time as there were 13 enemies waiting for him. Even so, Tutu was still confident in his own strength, so he asked the system what his chances of winning were. But when the system told him he only had a 20% chance of winning, he started to lose confidence. Tontuan noticed that expression on his face and mocked him even more. He gathered all his underlings to stand in front of Tutu. Before starting the group fight, he gave him one last chance to apologize and beg for forgiveness. However, Tutu mocked Tontuan and his Bactan gang for being too cowardly, not daring to face him one-on-one. He was trying to provoke Tontuan into a solo fight to increase his chances of winning. Tontuan saw right through it. The kid is still young and inexperienced, but being insulted still stings. He was about to make a move, but one of his underlings stepped forward and said he would fight in Tontuan's place. This person was Kwang Dao Trok, the strongest fighter in Tontuan's gang, so everyone thought Tutu was done for. A dead end. Even Tutu was a bit worried, so he asked the system to analyze Kwang Dao Trok's combat stats and saw that it was only 10, nothing too concerning. Kwang Dao Trok picked up the basketball and was about to throw it at Tutu, but the system warned him just in time. After that, Kwang Dao Trok charged in to attack, but Tutu dodged and put on a show in the yard. Meanwhile, in the classroom, Shen Dao was worried because Tutu was acting strangely since morning and wasn't answering his phone, so she decided to take matters into her own hands. Back on the soccer field, Kwang Dao Trok hadn't landed a hit on Tutu and was running out of steam. Now, all Tutu needed to do was deliver the finishing blow. The bald guy charged in again, but Tutu was still much faster. He grabbed the guy's leg, delivered a thunderous punch and hurled Kwang Dao Trok into the wall. The whole gang couldn't believe that Kwang Dao Trok had been completely thrashed by a nobody like Tutu. They turned to ask Tontuan, "What should we do, boss?" But he just laughed loudly and shouted that even if Tutu could defeat Kwang Dao Trok 2 against 1, at best he'd be crippled if not blinded, let alone one guy fighting against a whole group. Tutu asked the system if his chances of winning against the whole gang had increased at all. Since Kwang Dao Trok was still unconscious, there was one less enemy, but his chances of victory had only risen to 30%. It seemed the situation was still very tense. He had no choice but to face them all at once. Tutu took a defensive stance and began blocking the flurry of attacks, but he couldn't keep up with all of them and got ambushed from behind. That kick truly made Tutu angry. He turned around and channeled his inner strength straight into that guy's dragon and phoenix pair. Then he threw the man toward Tontuan. At this point, Tontuan started to feel quite worried, so he ordered his whole group to surround Tutu immediately. Tutu couldn't let himself get cornered, so he jumped onto the stage and started moving to create some distance. After that, he jumped down and tripped one of them, but was grabbed tightly from behind by another guy. He tried to break free, but before he could react, he was punched in the stomach and fell hard to the ground. The kick hurt like hell, but Tutu wasn't going to let himself get ambushed like that again. He got up and was ready to face them all. At first he was still overwhelmed by the continuous attacks, but this time he could sense the sneak attacks. He dodged and caught the leg of the guy who had kicked him in the stomach, then spun him around and threw him straight at Tontuan's face. Tontuan finally began to realize the terrifying strength of Tutu. He walked up to him, but the system warned him that he was about to run out of energy again. In his current state, Tutu couldn't defeat Tontuan in a one-on-one fight. Even so, even if it was to scare him a little, he still wanted to make him too afraid to trouble Shen Dao again. At that moment, the leader of Namtan appeared. He came to mock Tontuan and the Bactan gang for being taken down by a single guy. He said that if Tontuan couldn't even win against one person, he didn't deserve to be the leader of Bactan and should just give up. But Tutu interrupted him midway. He knew very well that there was already conflict between the two gangs, Bactan and Namtan, but that had nothing to do with him and he didn't want to get involved. However, even though he had never met Tutu and had no idea why he was fighting Tontuan, Hoak Huan, the leader of Namtan, still ordered his men to attack Tutu just to show off how tough he was. The system warned that with his current energy level, Tutu wouldn't make it home this spring if he faced them head-on. So he was forced to run for his life. Tutu asked the system if he could teleport, but because his energy was too low, he had to wait for the cooldown period. He kept running until he reached the stairs. By now, the cooldown period was over, so Tutu immediately teleported, and the first thing he did was turn off all the lights. While everyone was still confused in the darkness, Tiu-Tu teleported behind them. After looking Huan straight in the face, he mercilessly slammed him to the floor. After that, Tiu-Tu continued to take down each member of Huan's gang one by one. By the time the lights were turned back on, Tiu-Tu was the only one still standing. At this point, Tontuan was terrified of Tiu-Tu. Suddenly, a man's scream rang out from outside the gym. It seemed that Shen Dao had called the police because she was worried about Tiu-Tu's safety. The police were trying to break down the door to get in, and Shen Dao kept urging them to hurry because her friend might be in danger. Now Huan couldn't leave the building without being noticed, and he didn't want to get into trouble for fighting, so he had to quickly figure out a solution. He looked over at Tontuan and Tiu-Tu, then teleported them in front of him. Tontuan immediately knelt down and begged for forgiveness. Suddenly, he came up with a pretty good idea. He said he would spare Tontuan, but on one condition. When the police finally managed to open the gym door, they saw Tontuan grabbing Tiu-Tu by the collar and pretending to punch him. As a result, Tontuan and Huan were arrested for organizing a group fight in the gym. As for Tiu-Tu, he was acquitted because he managed to convince the police that he was just a bystander who got caught up in the incident by accident. He also made Tontuan promise never to bother Tam Dao again. The problem was temporarily resolved, but that fight made Tiu-Tu realize that his current strength still had many limitations. He needed to become stronger as soon as possible. To do that, he needs to find more gems. Tiu-Tu tried looking in jewelry stores, but he quickly realized he was broke, couldn't afford anything, and since the gods of fortune hadn't smiled on him yet, he gave up. He briefly considered finding himself a sugar mommy to get money for gemstones, but then decided it wasn't really worth it. So Tiu-Tu decided to go look for gemstones out in nature. He prepared a bunch of tools and set off for the nearest mountain range to begin his quest, and he actually found a few gems, but one was stuck under a huge boulder, another was at the bottom of a lake, and the last one was 15 meters above the ground. In other words, Tiu-Tu couldn't get any of them by himself. At that moment, the system notified Tiu-Tu that it had just detected an underground cave containing a large amount of gemstone energy. Curious, he tried to teleport into the cave, but strangely, even though he was close enough, he still couldn't teleport inside. The system explained that if the target area is completely sealed off, Tiu-Tu cannot teleport into it. To teleport into the cave, there needs to be at least a 1 centimeter wide gap, but Tiu-Tu didn't have enough strength to dig that deep. He thought for a moment and realized that if all he needed was a small gap near the cave, there might be one around the lake, since over time the water would surely have eroded the soil. After looking around, he did indeed find a small crack leading down into the cave. When he teleported into the cave, Tiu-Tu tumbled over because he hadn't expected the floor to be so slippery. He took out his flashlight and started searching around to see if there was anything, but all he saw was a frog. Suddenly the system announced that it had detected a gem right in front of him. But in front of Tiu-Tu was nothing but a blank wall. He was extremely frustrated. After all the effort it took to get down here, he still couldn't get the stone, but then he felt a breeze brush across his face. He immediately realized that if there was wind, there must be a gap somewhere. As soon as he found that gap, he teleported inside. After teleporting, Tiu-Tu discovered that he was in a completely different part of the cave. He took a few steps forward, but because he was distracted, he almost fell off the edge of a cliff. Luckily, he managed to stop himself in time, but his flashlight fell down. He decided to rest for a bit and then figure out the location of the gemstone before taking the next step. But it turned out that Tiu-Tu was not the only one in the cave. He managed to locate the stones. They were clustered together on the other side of the cave. However, that spot was beyond his teleportation range. While Tiu-Tu was still struggling to find a way to get closer, a giant snake silently slithered up behind him. But just as the snake was about to strike him, Tiu-Tu suddenly decided to teleport from one rock to another to get closer to the precious stones. Thanks to that, he narrowly escaped danger. Even now, he still doesn't know that a snake is lurking and stalking him in the tunnel. He decided to walk the rest of the way while waiting for his skill to cool down. Finally, he got close enough for the system to detect that there were a total of 12 gems here. Tiu-Tu was extremely excited, but at the same time realized that getting them wouldn't be easy, because the stone platforms near the gems were all very narrow and dangerous. He was still completely unaware that a snake was trying to swallow him whole, and he didn't dare risk teleporting recklessly because if he missed, he'd basically be sending himself to his death. But there was no other way. Right before the snake could bite him, Tiu-Tu teleported down and clung tightly to the rock as if it were a lifeline. Now that he was close enough to the gemstone, he tied the rope around himself for safety and began mining the stone. As soon as he got the first gem, he was overjoyed, but when he tried to get the second one, his hand slipped and the stone fell straight to the bottom of the cave. Xiaotu couldn't afford to lose that stone, so he tried to use his spatial sensing ability to locate it. But to his horror, he sensed a gigantic creature right next to him. The snake lunged to attack and Xiaotu slipped off the edge of the stone pillar. The snake immediately lunged after him. Fortunately, the rope around his waist held him suspended in mid-air, causing the snake to slip into the lake below. However, a few seconds later, the rope snapped and Xiaotu also fell into the water. Now he faced the risk of drowning, and the snake still hadn't given up on eating him. Xiaotu grabbed the shovel and tried to hit the snake, but it didn't seem to be affected at all. He was tightly coiled by the snake and squeezed to the point of suffocation. Xiaotu begged the system to teleport him away, but the system replied that as long as the snake held him, it was impossible. Xiaotu stabbed the shovel into the snake's body, making it release him in pain, but by then, Xiaotu had already lost consciousness from lack of air. The system immediately teleported him into the cubic dimension to save his life. When Xiaotu regained consciousness, he said he wanted to merge all the stones he had just collected. Alright, that works too. But the system informed him that there was a better way. Currently, Xiaotu possesses 11 basic gems, and they can be fused into a high-level gem, which would grant much greater power. Of course, Xiaotu wanted the high-level gem, but the system said that the synthesis process would take 4 days, and they didn't have that much time. So the system suggested that Xiaotu could use 9 gems to start the high-level gem synthesis process, and keep 2 gems to give him enough strength to return to fight the snake. After absorbing the 2 basic gems, Xiaotu immediately teleported out of the cube space and was attacked by the snake right away. But this time, Xiaotu easily blocked the attack and took down the snake in the blink of an eye. To be honest, Xiaotu was a bit disappointed because the battle was easier than he expected, but he was also grateful for the easy victory. He waded into the water to examine the snake's corpse and was surprised to discover another gem inside it, especially since this one looked particularly beautiful. Xiaotu immediately came up with a brilliant idea to make use of it. Meanwhile, Sun Jun and Hai Huan met at a bar, and Hai Huan was absolutely determined to take revenge on Xiaotu. Hai Huan wanted to get back at Xiaotu, but Sun Jun thought it wasn't worth it, since even if both their gangs joined forces, they still wouldn't be able to defeat Xiaotu. But Hai Huan suddenly announced that Nkiemla had returned to the city. The moment he heard that name, Sun Jun immediately chickened out and shouted that seeking out Nkiemla was no different from seeking death. But Hai Huan wasn't stupid enough to directly beg Nkiemla for help. Instead, he thought he could manipulate Nkiemla into taking action against Xiaotu on his own. He reminded Sun Jun that the reason Nkiemla left the city 2 years ago was because he had suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands of a higher-level figure named Tukok Tan. Sun Jun didn't know much about Tukok Tan, but he remembered that Tukok Tan was somehow connected to Shen Dao. At that time, Shen Dao was studying in the library when her phone rang. When she answered, the person on the other end warned her that someone was coming to find her. Immediately after, Shen Dao was surrounded by 4 men in suits, and it was clear that it wasn't even Christmas yet. Shen Dao immediately ran toward the exit, but one of them blocked her way, so she was forced to run down the hallway. She spotted a storage room, rushed inside and locked the door to keep them out. But now, there was no way out. The group started breaking down the door, while Shen Dao was terrified. Just when it seemed most hopeless, the person who had called her earlier told her to look behind her. Behind her was a floating mass of golden energy, and from within it, a hand reached out and touched her. Shen Dao closed her eyes, bracing herself for what was about to happen. By the time the group burst through the door, she had already disappeared. She had been taken away by Tukok Tan, who was also the one who had called to warn her about the agents. Now he was doing his best to get her as far away from them as possible. At the same time, he was smoothly showing off his veteran parkour club membership. However, the agents had a secret weapon to deal with Tukok Tan, guns. Decades of honed skills are no match for a single shotgun blast. Tukok Tan was shot while in midair. Although he wasn't seriously injured, it was now impossible for him to shake them off easily. He set Tam Dao down and raised a protective barrier around her, then got ready to fight. He jumped off the rocky ledge, and the moment he landed, he struck an agent so hard the guy saw his ancestors. Another agent rushed in to attack. Tukok Tan punched him away while simultaneously knocking back 2 others. Finally, one of the agents managed to grab Tukok Tan and dragged him up into the air. After a quick struggle in midair, he and 3 of his teammates joined forces to hurl Tukok Tan straight into the building. But when the dust settled, all 3 agents were unconscious, while Tukok Tan was completely unharmed, even though it was certain that at least 10 innocent people in that building had just kicked the bucket. Another agent was still facing him, so Tukok Tan slowly floated out of the building and began to take off his coat, because it looked incredibly cool. The other agent didn't want to waste any more time either, so he decided to go all out. He lifted an entire building and threw it at Tukok Tan. The people in that building were probably cursing their luck, thinking their 5 million salary wasn't worth leaving for work in the morning only to wake up at the gates of hell. But now there was no way out. The building was hurled straight at Tukok Tan. However, he didn't even break a sweat. Instead, he used his power to catch the building in midair, crush it, and then throw it back at the agent. What a fun game of volleyball, huh? The other guy tried to defend himself, but Tukok Tan simply compressed everything until a massive explosion occurred, sending both of them into a parallel world. Tu Tan looked annoyed because this incident would get him into trouble, even though he still had to deal with the agent. The agent pulled out a gun and pointed it at Tu Tan, but it's unclear what he thought a gun could accomplish when Tu Tan had just caught a whole building like it was nothing. But it didn't matter anymore, because guns were useless in this space and Tu Tan was out of time. A mass of golden energy began to surround Tu Tan and push the agent backward into the water. Time started to rewind, and Tu Tan hoped things would turn out differently in the next loop. Finally, everything returned to normal and Tamdao woke up at her desk in the library. She didn't remember anything about what had just happened and saw the boy, Tu, standing next to her. He asked her to help solve a math problem because he didn't understand the homework. Returning to the present, Hoak Huan continued to talk about his plan. Hiemla harbors a deep grudge against Tu Tan, so if they play their cards right, they can force Tu to fight Hiemla by using Tamdao as bait. The next day Tu had an appointment with Tamdao but she arrived late. When he called her, she didn't pick up. Strange, isn't it? Because Tamdao had never ignored his calls before. However, Tu thought she was probably busy with something, so he decided to wait a little longer. But then he overheard someone mention an incident that happened at the apartment complex where Tamdao lived and he had a bad feeling about it. Tu immediately rushed off to check. When he arrived, he saw the place swarming with police and Tamdao's mother sobbing uncontrollably because her daughter had been kidnapped. The police said they would conduct an investigation to find her, but Tu had no intention of just sitting around. He needed to know who was behind all of this. Right at that moment, he saw Tuan slipping through the crowd and immediately suspected that he was involved. Not long after, Tu cornered him in a dark alley and forced him to confess everything. At first Tuan pretended to be clueless and acted like he didn't know anything, but when Tu punched a hole through the wall and threatened to do the same to his head if he didn't tell the truth, he immediately spilled everything and recounted the entire plan that Hoak Huan had come up with. Meanwhile, Hoak Huan was deeply regretting the foolish brain cells that had made him think this was a good plan. Hiemla had already realized that Hoak Huan intended to use him and he absolutely hated being manipulated. However, he also absolutely hated Tu Tan, so if this plan could force Tu Tan to show himself, he would go along with it for now. However, that did not mean he forgave Hoak Huan. At the moment, Hiemla was chilling while playing golf, while Hoak Huan down below was holding a golf ball in his mouth, not something worth worrying about. As for Tamjiao, she was tied up in the corner of the room, trembling after witnessing what Hiemla had done to Hoak Huan. She tried to avoid his gaze, but he walked straight toward her. He said he was going to ask her a few questions and she'd better not lie, because he wouldn't hesitate to give her a makeover just like he did with Hoak Huan. He asked her what her relationship was with Tu Tan, but Tamjiao truly had never even heard that name before. Hiemla didn't believe her, because they had records showing that Tu Tan had once risked his life fighting extraordinary people just to save her, so there was no way she didn't know who he was. However, it was also possible that Tu Tan had saved her without revealing his true identity, so Tamjiao genuinely knew nothing about him. But clearly Tu Tan knew who Tamjiao was and seemed to care about her a lot. So it was truly strange that he still hadn't shown up to save her, even though she had been kidnapped. And even if Tu Tan did appear, Hiemla's butler wasn't sure Hiemla could win with their current forces. Hiemla, on the other hand, thought it was utterly ridiculous since he had spent a fortune hiring a team of professional mercenaries to carry out his revenge plan. Even so, they still didn't know exactly what Tu Tan's true strength was. Therefore, the butler believed that killing or harming Tamjiao at this point could be a mistake if they didn't have a plan to deal with Tu Tan. Hearing this, Hiemla understood the issue, so he calmed down and agreed not to touch her for the time being, then left the room. Meanwhile, Tuan had just finished telling Tu about the plan in which Hoak Huan persuaded Hiemla to kidnap Tamjiao because she was connected to Tu Tan. After listening, Tu still didn't understand anything, so he asked Tuan who exactly Tu Tan was and why Hiemla thought he could use Tamjiao as bait for him. Tuan recalled the incident that happened many years ago when Tamjiao was almost kidnapped. The public story at the time was that a kind passerby had saved her, but in reality, that person was actually Tu Tan. Since that day, many people have tried to track him down, but no one has succeeded because Tu Tan never leaves any traces. Except for one single time when he appeared and broke two of Hiemla's fingers. Since then, Hiemla has always harbored the intention of finding him to take revenge. Hoak Huan took advantage of this and gave Hiemla some information to incite him to kidnap Tamjiao. However, Tuan made it clear that he had opposed that plan from the very beginning and had nothing to do with it. Tu had heard enough, so he decided to set out to rescue Tamjiao. Since Tuan was not involved in this matter, he spared him. Tu finally arrived at the construction site where Tamjiao was being held. But as he got closer, the system warned that there were 7 extremely strong fighters inside. Tu realized this could be a tough battle, so he asked the system if the high-level gem had finished processing, but the system replied that it needed another 30 minutes to complete the fusion. Teo2 could wait to receive new power, but he didn't know if Tamjia was safe, so he couldn't afford to waste any more time. As he approached the building, Nkiemla and his group noticed him. Even though Teo2 wasn't Tukoktan, Nkiemla still thought it would be fun to torment him, so he ordered his fighters to attack. However, to make things more entertaining, they were only allowed to fight him one at a time, not gang up on him. Teo2 walked up to the main gate and was about to break the lock to get in, but was stopped by a fighter named Pablo. Pablo warned him that the lock was reinforced with a supernatural barrier. If Teo2 tried to break it by force, he would suffer severe backlash and could even lose his life. So Teo2 told him to hand over the key, but Pablo couldn't do that because he had orders to kill anyone who tried to go upstairs. Even so, Teo2 had no intention of giving up the game, and if Pablo stood in his way, he would have to defeat him. According to the system, Pablo has a strength stat of 52, while Teo2 only has 50, meaning he's at a disadvantage. Pablo strikes first and this attack could be fatal, but Teo2 dodges in time and lands a kick to his face. However, the kick doesn't deal any damage at all. Pablo is stronger and has higher endurance than Teo2, so even though he's a bit faster, he can't land a critical blow with his bare hands. But then he realizes that this is a street fight, so there's no need to follow any rules at all. When Pablo charges at him again, he teleports the nearby hammer into his hand and smashes it straight into Pablo's head, hitting so hard that Pablo's skull caves in. As he was quietly lulled into eternal sleep, Teo2 took the key and continued to the next floor. As Teo2 runs up the stairs, the system warns him that the next fighter has a power level of 75. However, he doesn't hesitate and charges straight into the room. The moment he steps inside, Teo2 realizes that all the lights have been turned off and now the room is pitch black. The fighter on this floor, Litra Duke, is an assassin who has mastered the art of hiding in the shadows. All of his stat points are invested in stealth skills, so he can easily sneak up behind Teo2 and finish him off before Teo2 even realizes it. At least that could have happened if Teo2 didn't possess the ability to sense space. Thanks to this, he knows exactly where Litra Duke is, so when Litra Duke is about to strike from behind, Teo2 pulls out a baseball bat and swings it straight at Litra Duke's population lever. On the upper floor, two other fighters are watching Teo2 as he defeats each opponent, and they can't help but be surprised at how easily he beats them. However, his next opponent is Belgood, a guy they are certain Teo2 has no chance of defeating. They guess that Belgood will only need a few seconds to crush Teo2, but if by some miracle Teo2 actually manages to defeat Belgood, then he'll have to face the remaining two. The girl in the group is especially eager to fight him. Teo2 finally reaches the next floor where Belgood is already standing with his back turned, waiting for him. He was about to express his admiration for Teo2 making it this far, but Teo2 wasn't interested in listening and immediately tried to hit him from behind with his staff. However, Belgood caught him and slammed Teo2 down onto the floor. That slam made Teo2 feel like he could barely breathe. He knew he didn't stand a chance of winning in the current situation, but luckily the system notified him that the high-level gem was almost done processing. He just needed to hold out a little longer to receive his new power. Of course, that was easier said than done because Belgood was unleashing a relentless combo on Teo2, leaving him no time to react. Teo2 tried to kick him, but that turned out to be a mistake. Belgood caught his leg, twisted his arm and punched Teo2, sending him flying through a pillar. Teo2 could have died, but at that very moment, a minute had passed and the system began integrating the power from the gem. It healed his body and enhanced all of his stats. Now the balance of the fight had shifted in Teo2's favor. When he stood up again, Belgood prepared for another round, but with just one punch from Teo2, he was sent flying across the room. That punch made Belgood start to doubt his entire training process because he couldn't believe that a nameless kid could defeat a warrior like him. But right after that, the kid unleashed a shadow strike and sent him crashing through the wall. Hyemla was watching the entire fight through the cameras and was furious when he saw the professionally trained fighters he had hired being utterly defeated by an unknown kid. Maybe they should have just had everyone gang up on Teo2 from the start. However, Butler Chanan still had two more fighters who would definitely be able to defeat Teo2. They came from the Trio Tash Martial Arts Alliance, a formidable force. The girl in the group was even more terrifying than her teammate. Ever since she arrived, she had been wearing a power ceiling bracelet. If she were to take it off, no one would dare to guess what kind of destruction she might unleash. At this moment, Teo2 was climbing the stairs to the next floor, but his heart rate warning system was spiking and he was under severe psychological pressure. Teo2 knew this very well because he could sense the terrifying killing intent emanating from the people on the upper floor. But no matter what, he had to keep going because Shendao was waiting to be rescued. Teo2 moved forward, opened the door, and was ready to fight to the end with the remaining enemies. He encountered two other members of Trio Tak, and a girl named Teo Kui, who had already introduced herself to him. Teo Kui was very excited when Teo2 arrived, and she approached to size up his strength. She seemed surprised when she discovered that he didn't have any superpowers at all. The man accompanying her pointed out that Teo was not a cultivator and that his internal strength was almost non-existent, so he could only rely on hard work. Teo confirmed that he had been training his physical strength and she felt extremely pleased. After that, Teo shook hands with Teo but then suddenly interrupted the interaction. Teo, feeling provoked, decided to join in and increase the interaction as well. However, Teo felt very happy and told herself that his energy was so pure that it didn't cause any internal harm to her. She realized that purity could be divided into two types, and this type was like a pure gemstone. When Teo noticed that Teo was flying without wings, he called her crazy and immediately backed away from her. Teo burst out laughing and then attacked Teo. She gathered her strength and launched a series of strikes, but he grabbed her head and stopped her. However, Teo didn't stop and even gave him a kick, knocking him down to the ground. The man accompanying Teo told Teo to give up and let everything end peacefully. After that, Teo approached him with a smile on her face and suddenly kicked him, sending him crashing straight into the wall. Teo, enraged, charged forward to strike back at Teo, but she actually felt delighted and told herself that these blows were quite pleasant and she felt very happy. She continued to attack Teo, unleashing a flurry of strikes, but he managed to counter her completely and sent her flying. Even so, Teo still felt cheerful. Then Teo got angry again and kept beating her up. She marveled at how pleasant each blow felt and wondered if he was really hitting her with all his strength to make it feel this way. After that, she knocked Teo to the ground and revealed her monstrous form but quickly returned to her human appearance. The man who was following her grabbed her hand and told her she shouldn't use her skills on a newly created account, then asked her to calm down. But Teo told him not to interfere. She approached Teo again and said that he was very useful to her and that she wanted to become stronger. Then she suggested that they should go somewhere freer, like the Western Pure Land for example. Then she attacked Teo again and delivered a fatal blow to him. Teo tried to follow her trail, but just as she disappeared right before his eyes, she reappeared behind him a second later. Even stranger, she approached and suddenly sucked his blood. Teo was shocked and hurriedly pushed Teo away. She continued to attack him, but this time he raised his large staff to keep her at a distance. Teo then struck, sending Teo flying far away. He remarked that she was not only strong but also very fast and that he needed to fight seriously or else he would be logged out. After that, Teo continued to charge at Teo, beating him so badly that he was seriously injured and almost knocked out. She kept attacking but he tried to fight back. Unfortunately, she managed to fly up into the air just in time, dodging Teo's strike and then continued to rush forward to attack him. Teo tried to defend himself, but Teo kept appearing and disappearing like a Canadian illusionist. She moved around him, then bit him from behind, leaving Teo in pain as he struggled to stay in the fight. He tried to strike back, but she dodged every attack, which was frustrating. After sucking his blood, Teo almost transformed into a lone wild wolf, but Tu Thong threw her a needle to restrain her and prevent the transformation. Thanks to that needle, Teo returned to her normal state. Teo was astonished as he witnessed everything. He felt as if he had just fought a monster. After that, Teo looked toward the gemstones and thought this was a good opportunity. But just as he was about to approach, Tu Thong managed to attack and stop him. Teo was very surprised and wondered how he could have been hit so hard. Tu Thong prepared to confront Teo, but he just calmly commented that he was very strong and he was ready to receive his move. Tu Thong grumbled in response and then launched an attack at Teo, but Teo managed to dodge it. Tu Thong complimented him, saying he dodged that move well but asked, what about the next one? But at that moment, Teo was in pain, so Tu Thong turned back to continue treating her. He declared that if Teo had come to rescue the girl upstairs, then go ahead, and he would let him save her without interference. Teo asked, so, are you surrendering to me, Tu Thong? Then how are you going to explain this to your superiors? He argued that if Tu Thong wanted to surrender, that meant he wouldn't attack him after he left, right? Tu Thong replied that as a member of the Jiaoshi Martial Arts Alliance, how could he possibly surrender? Teo thought to himself that it would be best not to fight while Tu Thong was treating Teo, but if he finished the treatment and the two of them ganged up on him, he'd be in trouble. Therefore, Teo said that if Tu Thong didn't want to surrender, then in the end, he would still have to fight him. Tu Thong replied that he couldn't surrender, but he would make a blood oath that he was not Teo's enemy. He showed Teo the token of the Trio Tash Martial Arts Alliance and said that this oath was the most solemn commitment a cultivator could make. He swore that he would cease hostilities with Teo, and if he broke that oath, he would suffer shattered bones and flesh, and his ashes would be scattered by the wind. Teo recorded a video as a historical document and explained that he just wanted to keep a little memento with him. Tu Thong handed Teo the token of Trio Touch and told him to leave. Teo asked if this token was made in China. Tu Thong replied, if you don't believe it, give it back. Teo quickly clarified that adults doing business have credibility. No one would do that. Teo approached Tu Thong and hoped that both he and Teo would repent. Then he told him to take care of himself before leaving. After that, the scene shifts to Tioki's younger sister Misa, as Tutong is contacting her and instructing her to withdraw immediately because Tioki is already exhausted. While they were talking, Misa was attacked, which caused her to lose consciousness and lose contact with him. The scene then shifts to Nhyemla, who wonders where the remaining martial artist is planning to go. The other guy simply asks if Nhyemla still hasn't realized anything, and he conveniently informs him that all the martial artists he hired have already been sent packing. Nhyemla was utterly shocked when he heard this. Nhyemla asked his assistant if the information was accurate, and the assistant replied the plan had changed, they had to withdraw. Nhyemla started to get furious and asked if Tukok-than was really the one behind all of this. The assistant replied that Tukok-than was no match for that brat. He then informed that the Zhaoxi Martial Arts Alliance had ceased hostilities with Xiao Tu and emphasized that the urgent mission still needed to be completed. Nhyemla could not hide his fury. He tried to persuade So-mak-san to stay and continue the plan with him, even promising to pay double the reward. But So-mak-san turned the tables on Nhyemla. Fortunately, Nhyemla's assistant stepped in to protect him. So-mak-san warned Nhyemla that he had made it clear from the start, don't try to order him around with money. Nhyemla's assistant commented that it's best not to mess with this guy, as he's the most arrogant young man among the Takot Luksat. Tiotu moved up to the next floor and burst through a door. Koi Luk Fuang had said that he would have to face 7 martial artists, so he guessed he only had 2 more passes to go. The voice agreed but also added that they had all disappeared and he didn't know where they had gone. After that, So-mak-san appeared. He had been waiting for Tiotu here and declared that he was the remaining opponent. Next to him was the wooden puppet, Tio-son. The voice said their combat strength was 7 and Tio2 was very surprised. Showing up like the final boss but with the strength of a new arc, then both introduced themselves to him as So-mak-san. Tio2 immediately asked if the power block info was accurate. The voice replied, the info was as accurate as a Vietnamese origin Y journalist. However, the structure of the wooden puppet was also very intricate and complex. It also contains a mid-grade gemstone inside. After that, So-mak-san told Tio2 not to worry because he was just a kid compared to a level B martial artist and said that his strength wasn't even equal to Tio2's. However, he also said that nature will reduce what is excessive and make up for what is lacking. Then he charged forward, opened the fight and struck Tio2 with a palm, sending him flying straight into the wall. After that, So-mak-san approached Tio2, raised his weapon, and praised him for being very daring, but said he could only rely on that brute strength. As for himself, he had been trained to use magic arts, talisman techniques and escape techniques, all of which were pure skills. While he was rambling on, Tio2 threw a bunch of bottles and jars at So-mak-san, but he caught them all without a scratch. After that, Tio2 charged straight at his face but he dodged again and even managed to counterattack in time, knocking Tio2 hard to the ground. However, he didn't give up and kept unleashing his skills, trying to give So-mak-san a hard time, but the problem was he just couldn't land a hit. So-mak-san dodged and blocked all of Tio2's attacks. Then So-mak-san started launching a few critical strikes at Tio2, but at most, Tio2 only got slightly injured. However, after that he started to bleed. Seeing an opportunity, So-mak-san wanted to drain his HP bar, but Tio2 quickly threw dirt at him to distract him. Then, Tio2 rushed in and unleashed a flurry of attacks, but he was still able to hold his own against So-mak-san. The two exchanged martial arts moves back and forth, but So-mak-san used a spell to buff his attacks and successfully pushed Tio2 back. Taking advantage of the moment, he charged forward and put all his strength into another strike. After that, So-mak-san revealed his trump card, the wooden puppet Tio-son, and controlled it to pummel Tio2 with 77-49 combined moves. Tio-son didn't stop but kept beating him so badly that Tio2 was overwhelmed, all while still trying to defend himself. While dodging, Tio2 got close to Tio-son and counterattacked, sending Tio-son flying into the wall. After that, So-mak-san continued to attack Tio2. He unleashed an extremely powerful strike, punching Tio2 so hard that he coughed up strawberry syrup. At the same time, Tio2 grabbed So-mak-san's hair and he angrily demanded that Tio2 let go immediately. He started pummeling Tio2 relentlessly to force him to release his grip, but Tio2 refused. After that, Tio2 held tightly onto his hair and knocked him flat on his back, sending him crashing down to dear Mother Earth. A large clump of hair was torn out and left in Tio2's hand. He thought to himself that if this guy were just an ordinary martial artist, that single blow would have put him straight into a coffin. Immediately after, So-mak-san got up and asked how Tio2 was able to break the talisman with just one punch. Because of course he didn't believe that Tio2 could actually do that. Then he added that although Tio2 was very strong, if he didn't fight more seriously, the money he had spent would all go to waste. After that, his hair turned silver. He began to use magic and warned Tio2 that anyone who saw him in this form would have to die. He immediately charged at Tio2 and unleashed a series of attacks, any one of which would send someone straight to the funeral home. Tio2 tried to defend himself but couldn't hold out. So-mak-san continuously cast enhancement spells on his attacks, and the force of his blows pushed Tio2 back. He almost fell off the building, but managed to save himself just in time. After that, Tio-son bombarded Tio2 with a barrage of magical attacks, but Tio2 dodged them and began to close in on Tio-son. He grabbed Teo-son thinking he could finish the match now, but Teo-son also grabbed hold of him. At that moment So-mak-son had control over both of them and used all his strength to slam Teo-2 hard against the wall. After that, So-mak-son approached Teo-2 and asked if he knew how much the talisman he had attached to Teo-2's body was worth. Teo-2 replied that he was hungry. So-mak-son said, each one costs a whole jack, then used the talisman to give Teo-2 a beating. He continued to attack with such force that it caused another huge explosion. Meanwhile, Nhimla was watching the battle and praised, now that's a true hero. Standing next to him, Tumdao felt sorry for Teo-2. Back to So-mak-son, he said the fight was over. War really is just a waste of money. But right at that moment, Teo-2 reappeared, holding a large shovel in his hand, and So-mak-son was utterly astonished. He angrily demanded to know how Teo-2 could withstand the attack with just that shovel. Teo-2 replied, surprised aren't you, you jerk? This is the power of a farmer's shovel and it only cost me 1 coin to buy it. So-mak-son replied, alright if you like I'll play along. He declared he would spend 144 million more to finish Teo-2 off. Even anonymous artists supporting their kids haven't spent this much. So-mak-son used the wooden puppet to trap Teo-2, but Teo-2 was fully prepared to face him and swung his shovel in response. So-mak-son was completely taken aback. He wondered to himself how Teo-2 could have mastered such earth manipulation techniques. Teo-2 said he had a trump card up his sleeve, and it was So-mak-son who forced him to use it. He also admitted that So-mak-son was indeed very skilled. After that he grabbed the string that So-mak-son used to control Teo-son. He said that there were 5 gravity talismans stuck on Teo-2, so he wanted to see how long Teo-2 could hold out. He tried to pull the string out of Teo-2's hand but couldn't. Now Teo-2 explained, asking if he had forgotten that he had just stuck 5 gravity talismans on him. Teo-2 pulled So-mak-son closer, gave him a good beating, then pushed him away and cut the rope between them. In the end, Teo-son tumbled and crashed into the wall. After that, even though Teo-2 felt utterly exhausted, he still kept moving forward. The scene shifts to Nhimla and his assistant, Uncle Deep. The assistant said they needed to retreat immediately, but Nhimla replied that he could no longer run away. He told his assistant that he knew he was saved because he was the 3rd young master of the Nhim family, and his death would bring shame and disgrace to the family's reputation. Nhimla's assistant swore that protecting him was his duty. Nhimla took off his gloves and said that his assistant always knew he had a trump card and that he could turn the situation around. This was not simply a reckless act of revenge, he had staked everything on this opportunity. The assistant replied that if that was the case, he would do everything in his power to protect Nhimla's life. Scene transition. The stone inside Xiaoshan is about to explode. After that So-mak-son runs away, saying that even though he hasn't fought with all his might, everything is still under his control. He plans to give Teo-2 another talisman to finish him off but is shocked to find that darkness has suddenly enveloped everything. He exclaims, damn, I must have bought fake goods from Shopee, and flies into a rage. He is astonished to see Teo-2 walking out from the building. Teo-2 intends to give So-mak-son a level 2 total punch, but So-mak-son manages to throw an explosive talisman at him in time. Teo-2 soars into the air and dodges them all. But So-mak-son doesn't give up either. He is determined to unleash even more attacks. Teo-2 manages to dodge some of them, but a few strikes still manage to scratch him. After that, So-mak-son casts a spell on a large rock and surrounds Teo-2 with explosive stones. But Teo-2 successfully uses a talisman to block the attack and charges at So-mak-son once again. Teo-son managed to remove a few talismans from the rocks, but the other stones were still primed to explode, and there was a huge blast that nearly hit Teo-2. However, he thought of Shen Dao, and that gave him renewed strength. He charged in, landing punch after punch on So-mak-son without missing. If So-mak-son were alive, he'd probably need a new ID photo. Then, Teo-2 and the wooden puppet rolled into the inner courtyard, but Teo-2 was the last one standing. Not long after, he lost consciousness. When he woke up, he called out Shen Dao's name and thought to himself that he still had to go save her. He headed toward the rooms of Shen Dao and Nhimla, asking whether they had managed to escape. Unexpectedly, he ran into Hoak Huan and asked where Shen Dao was. He begged him not to kill him, but he only grew angrier and demanded again where she was. In the end, he finally gave in and told Xiao Tu, and he immediately ran off to look for her. As soon as he arrived, he hurriedly smashed open the wooden door. Once he got inside, he untied Shen Dao and she warned him to get out immediately because there was a bomb attached under the chair that would detonate the moment she stood up. When Xiao Tu saw the bomb, Shen Dao urged him to run and save himself. But Xiao Tu reassured her, saying that today he had already faced things even worse than this. At that moment, Yan La locked the door behind them and said that this room was created by So-mak-son. A voice echoed telling Xiao Tu that he couldn't use teleportation here. Nikiam La said he would stay here and watch them die. Xiao Tu immediately asked the cube how to disable the bomb now. The voice replied that he just needed to cut the wires in order. He followed the instructions and threw the bomb into the cube, but the stone inside the wooden puppet exploded and Xiao Tu lost consciousness. Yanla shouted angrily, "Where's the bomb?" As he stormed into the room and started shooting, Yanla's assistant urged them to escape immediately. While they were fleeing, Shendao was hit. Xiaotu tried to carry her and encouraged her to hang in there. But at that moment, Tu Gushen appeared and told Xiaotu that he couldn't save her. Then he carried Shendao away. Xiaotu tried to chase after them but couldn't catch up. Tu Gushen mocked Xiaotu, saying that he couldn't even protect himself, let alone the one he loved. Then he disappeared along with Shendao. Xiaotu angrily ran to the window. He tried to hold on to Shendao but couldn't. He looked up at Tu Gushen, who told him that he never really understood her or the supernatural world at all. After that, he admitted that he was the one who caused this mess and swore he would handle everything himself. Then he disappeared, leaving Xiaotu alone in tears, longing for the beautiful moments with Shendao. Xiaotu was completely devastated after losing Shendao. He stood from afar, watching her parents weeping at their daughter's fake funeral. Xiaotu silently cursed his own weakness for not being able to save the girl he loved, and now he didn't even know where to begin looking for her. While he was lost in self-blame and uncertainty, a car suddenly stopped behind him. A woman got out and called his name. She told Xiaotu to come with her, and when she saw that he didn't respond, she said she knew where Yimla was. Immediately, Xiaotu turned around and asked where that bastard was, and the woman said if he wanted to talk, he should just come with her. She took him to a nearby cafe and started sipping her coffee. While Xiaotu coldly stared at her, he directly asked where Yimla was, but the woman replied that before answering, she also had a few questions for him. She asked Xiaotu what he thought about mutants, cultivators or extraordinary superhumans who might be blending into human society. Xiaotu replied, "Maybe they're just good at disguising themselves?" The woman laughed at his naivety and said that, in fact, there are people whose job is to handle the messes caused by mutants. "But who is so hungry?" Xiaotu responded. But the woman told him that he should at least pretend to care. Because all this time she has been quietly protecting him. Otherwise he probably wouldn't have made it back alive each time. Xiaotu just took a sip of coffee and gave a wry smile. He asked, "So do the three people sitting behind their table, the ones ready to shoot him full of holes at any moment, also belong to that protection team?" The three men were stunned when they realized their identities had been exposed. The woman was just as surprised. She drew her gun, and her three subordinates also aimed at Xiaotu. However, he stayed calm and said that as long as they didn't make sudden moves, both sides could keep talking peacefully. The woman listened to him seriously, then signaled her subordinates to stand down. Xiaotu used his supersensory ability to read the name tag and title on her. He learned that the woman's name was Mo Vute and that she was the captain of the Bureau of Superhuman Management. Xiaotu admitted that he did believe she had secretly protected him, but he still wanted to know what her true purpose was. Mo Vute confidently replied that since she was helping him, he should be sensible and return the favor. Xiaotu asked if she wanted him to become a mercenary for the Bureau, just like her subordinates. Then he sarcastically remarked that all those lackeys were pathetically weak. One punch isn't enough, but two punches are too much. One of the group told Mo Vute that Xiaotu was at least a B-rank powerhouse. He completely outclassed them, but she didn't seem to care at all. She said that if Xiaotu wanted information about Nyemla, he would have to complete 3 tasks for her. Xiaotu replied that he would only do 1 task, and in addition he also wanted more information about Tukok Tan. Surprisingly, Mo Vute accepted all the conditions without any bargaining, which even made Xiaotu feel astonished. When he received the details of the task, Mo Vute said it would only take about a day to complete, and he would also be paid quite well. However, Xiaotu asked how he could trust her. Mo Vute pretended to be outraged by that question. Then she said that after their conversation, he should have been absolutely clear that she was on his side. After saying that, she left the cafe, leaving Xiaotu alone, still wondering whether she was truly trustworthy or not. But he also understood that, at the moment, Mo Vute was the only lead to track down information about Nyemla, so he made a plan to take advantage of her in order to infiltrate the Bureau of Supernatural Management and get what he needed. Meanwhile, as Mo Vute was sitting in the car waiting for the traffic light, the driver asked her why she would go and make a deal with someone as dangerous as Xiaotu, when doing so was completely against the organization's policy. She simply replied, "Fortune favors the bold." She was too ambitious to stay stuck in her current position forever, and she was certain that Xiaotu was the ticket that would help her rise quickly. She realized he had tremendous potential, and all they needed to do was take advantage of him to achieve their goals. But Mo Vute had no idea that Xiaotu had placed a surveillance cube on the roof of the car and was eavesdropping on their entire conversation. He wasn't angry when he found out that Mo Vute was scheming to use him because he thought she was just a greedy woman, the kind of person who was even easier to control. Meanwhile, the driver asked if Mo Vute was really going to reveal Nyemla's location to Xiaotu. She sneered and said she only planned to give Xiaotu some useless street gossip because she thought he was just a hapless guy who wouldn't realize he was being deceived. Hearing that, Xiao became furious and swore he would show her who the real clown was. The next day, Xiao went to attend the evaluation at the location Mo Vute had shared before he could receive the assignment. He discovered that it was a luxurious villa in the middle of the forest, and many other fighters had already gathered there to participate in the selection round. While Xiao was wondering what was going on, someone picked up a microphone and began the evaluation session. He announced that they had all been gathered here to be selected as bodyguards for a special client. He declared that a bodyguard must possess agility, quick reflexes, and the strength to carry out their duties, so they would be tested based on those criteria. After that, he opened the door leading the contestants into a mini casino inside the house. Each person was given 5 chips, and the game master announced that they were free to play any game to increase their number of chips. To qualify for the next round, each person needed to collect 10 chips, but fighting or stealing chips from others was strictly forbidden. Immediately, the crowd decided to play cards because they believed the machines here would definitely be rigged. But even so, they still lost everything when playing cards. Some guy suddenly appeared out of nowhere and started lecturing Xiao, but he wasn't in the mood to listen to a sermon, so he quietly left to look for another game to play. He came across a woman playing the familiar game of finding the coin under the cup and decided to try his luck. However, the talkative guy from earlier started following him again. The guy complained that if Xiao kept walking away when someone wanted to be friends with him, it was really rude. However, he realized that the guy was actually just trying to scam him. Having been exposed and unable to pull off his trick, the guy got nothing. He became flustered and challenged him to a bet. Xiao cheerfully accepted and wagered all his chips, while the other guy also bet all of his. The game master placed the coin under one of the 3 cups and then began to shuffle them chaotically. The con artist bet on the left cup, but Xiao used his super senses to detect that the female game master had hidden the coin in her right hand. Xiao immediately asked her to show her right hand. The woman was extremely skilled, quickly transferring the coin to her left hand before showing her right hand, but he continued to insist that she let him check both hands. In the end, the woman admitted that he had guessed correctly from the start because she had indeed deliberately hidden the coin. Then she announced that Xiao was the winner and had doubled her chips, while the other contestants stood there bewildered, not understanding what had just happened. The con artist thought that the game master had used 2 coins, one placed inside the cup and the other, through a secret passage, had fallen under the table. He started rummaging around inspecting the table in hopes of uncovering the trick. But the woman calmly said that the table hadn't been tampered with at all, and from beginning to end, she had only used a single coin. She also coldly announced that he had lost all his chips. Meanwhile, Xiao calmly walked away, her face full of triumph and her prize in hand, leaving the furious con artist behind. After a few hours and several more rounds of inspection, the final 5 contestants were selected for the mission, and of course, the main character was among them. Once the bodyguards had settled into their seats, the manager congratulated them for passing the test and then called in their client, Park Kim. A portly man with an extremely impressive set of gold teeth swaggered arrogantly into the room. He declared that all of them should feel honored to have the opportunity to serve as his bodyguards for tonight's party. He instructed them to do their jobs well, because if he was satisfied, he would give them a bonus. After saying this, he told the manager to handle the rest and slowly left the room. The manager then announced that Park Kim had already transferred 3 million yuan in advance to their bank account and that they would receive the remaining payment after the mission was completed. At this point, Xiao jumped up from his seat and asked the manager to confirm exactly how much the advance payment was. The manager repeated that it was 3 million yuan and that Mr. Mo Yuxi's representative had already received it. Xiao realized he had been played for a bigger fool than he thought. Because that woman had dared to trick him, telling him this job only paid 50,000. He silently cursed Mo Yuxi for being so rotten, but the manager ignored him and told everyone to get ready because the party would start in about 6 hours. Immediately after, the bodyguards were escorted while the assistants shared information with them. The girl driving Xiao informed him that her boss's main goal was to attend the auction that would be held during the party, and he wanted to obtain the ancient mask. As Xiao was reading the file and listening to her talk, he suddenly noticed something interesting. He showed the girl a photo of a strangely shaped crystal, and she replied that it was the original essence of black liquor, one of the most prominent items at the auction. That name reminded Xiao of the moment when he was about to lose consciousness after the explosion on that fateful day. The cube had whispered the name black liquor to him. He was certain that this crystal was exactly what the cube had mentioned, and now he was even more interested in attending the auction. Suddenly Xiao felt a sharp pain in his head, but he just told the assistants that it was nothing serious. He continued reading the dossier, thinking to himself that even though Mo Vute had given him a blow harsher than eating chili, there were still many things he needed to explore at this party. Not long after, the car arrived, and Xiao along with the other bodyguards entered the enormous mansion. They saw the wealthy guests enjoying wine and chatting with each other, but even though it was supposed to be a party, the atmosphere was gloomy and eerily dark. Suddenly, the lights were switched on and the host announced that it was time to start the party, wasting no more time. He immediately kicked off the first game. He pressed a button and the floor suddenly opened up, revealing a giant crocodile underneath. Some guests were terrified by the sight, but the host reassured them that there was no need to worry because their safety was his top priority. He walked over to the open section of the floor, stood right above it, and assured everyone that this glass was bulletproof. Even if the crocodile could jump that high, it still wouldn't be able to reach them. The guests breathed a sigh of relief, but then an arrogant young man complained that the host had been too hasty and should have started with something lighter for the appetizer. The host replied that this party would be wilder than any party Didi had ever thrown, so they wouldn't be holding back. After that, he explained the rules of the game to everyone. He pointed to the golden bell on the crocodile's neck and announced that only whoever managed to get it would be considered the winner. However, they were only allowed to use melee weapons, and unless someone managed to get the bell, no one would be able to leave the cage. Teo2 couldn't help but panic and realized that he hadn't been hired as a bodyguard, but rather as an entertainer, a gladiator for those crazy rich people. However, the host of the party offered a large amount of gold bars as a reward for the winner of the first game. Someone was the first to be unable to resist that reward and volunteered to go down first. He was only equipped with a spear and a shield. He quietly approached the crocodile, but at the last moment he started screaming like mad and charged in to attack. The crocodile immediately reacted. It tore into him and ate him alive while he continued to scream in pain. The rich people sneered at the man's arrogance, saying that he was weak but still wanted to show off. But Xiaotu was certain that the man was not weak. The real problem was this crocodile. The host confirmed this and said that this was not an ordinary crocodile, but a genetically modified creature they had created in the laboratory. He boasted that the crocodile possessed superior speed and strength, then increased the reward to entice the remaining participants. This time, no one dared to volunteer, but then an arrogant rich man ordered his bodyguard to go down and compete. The bodyguard obeyed the order without question. He brought as many spears as he could and stepped into the cage to face the crocodile. Teo2 sighed, wondering why people here were so foolish and greedy, not realizing that no one could defeat this crocodile. One of the other bodyguards asked him if he had read the contract carefully before signing, because it clearly stated that if no one volunteered, a participant would be chosen at random. A huge question mark appeared on Teo2's face and he exclaimed that this was completely unfair. But the other person retorted that if the job were truly safe, how could they possibly pay 3 million yuan for just one day? Hearing this made Teo2's heart sink because he was only being paid 50,000 yuan for this job. But right at that moment he noticed a man standing on the balcony. The man exuded an overwhelming aura from every pore and looked as grumpy as someone suffering from constipation for a second week. Teo2's colleagues told him to stop staring because that man was from the Ludra committee. They are the organization that supervises order at parties like this. Teo2 immediately turned to look at the fighting pit. There, the rich man's bodyguard had already stabbed the crocodile several times with his spear. He used his speed and higher ground to keep striking the animal from outside its reach. However, Teo2 realized that the crocodile actually hadn't suffered any real damage, and no matter how confident the other man was, he was bound to lose. At that moment, the man in the cage jumped down from above, intending to deliver the finishing blow, but the crocodile simply swung its tail once, smashing him to pieces like ground meat. All the guests shuddered in horror at the sight and the rich man tried to back away, hiding himself in the crowd. The host, on the other hand, was very pleased with the outcome, increased the reward and asked if anyone else wanted to volunteer. Suddenly, the girl in Teo2's group whispered something into Fat Kim's ear, and Fat Kim announced that if anyone could defeat the crocodile, he would personally double the host's reward out of his own pocket. Many fighters were excited when they heard about the huge reward, and another man asked his master for permission to enter the fight. "Permission granted," said the master. But right at that moment, another person from Teo2's team, with a hairstyle resembling a character from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4, also stepped forward. Seeing that there were 2 volunteers, the host announced that only the last survivor would get to face the crocodile. Teo2 was bewildered, unable to comprehend what the hell was going on, and the girl next to her explained that now the 2 volunteers would have to fight to the death and only the survivor would be allowed to continue participating in the game. Teo2 cursed this wretched game, saying it was utterly ridiculous because even the winner would be exhausted after such a life and death battle. But someone else said that he was underestimating his teammate, who went by the nickname Poisonous King Kim. The 2 of them stepped onto the glass floor, and the boss of the second person promised a promotion and a vacation if he won. Hearing that, he couldn't hide his joy, but as soon as he turned around, Poisonous King Kim took the opportunity to bite his shoulder and drain all his life force, using it to temporarily enhance his own strength. The man collapsed, his body shriveled like a mummy, and the host allowed him to enter the next cage. Poisonous King Kim confidently stepped in, not bothering to bring any weapons. The host asked if he was sure he really wanted to fight barehanded, and he replied, "The crocodile doesn't have any weapons either, so if I did, it wouldn't be fair." He calmly approached the beast, and the more perceptive people in the audience all sensed that something was off. Only Kyoto noticed that poisonous King Kim was rubbing his hands and releasing some kind of golden dust into the air, but he also didn't understand what that was for, so he could only quietly observe. Poisonous King Kim stood waiting for the crocodile to strike first. The beast lunged forward intending to finish him off in a single fatal blow. But poisonous King Kim simply jumped up and sat on its head. Then he bent down and gently kissed the crocodile's head, leaving everyone completely baffled. The crocodile also calmed down, but just as poisonous King Kim leapt up, the crocodile's massive head flew into the air, blood splattering everywhere, and the golden bell fell right at his feet. Everyone was stunned into silence from the shock, and Kyoto realized that poisonous King Kim possessed a speed equal to that of a level B martial artist, and his techniques were still very mysterious. Meanwhile, poisonous King Kim picked up the golden bell, confidently walked out of the cage, and handed it back to the host of the party. The host of the party even seemed rather disappointed that the crocodile had been defeated so easily. But he did not forget to announce that poisonous King Kim had become the first champion of the night. He asked him if he wanted to receive the reward now, but poisonous King Kim replied that he wanted the prize to be delivered secretly later, as he wished to keep his identity hidden. Park Kim was very pleased that his man had won the first game and raised his glass to congratulate him. However, the rest of the wealthy guests were not satisfied at all, and one of the more insolent ones spoke up, asking if this was really the best game the host could come up with. The host replied, "The fun has only just begun, and there are many more exciting things waiting ahead." Meanwhile, the crocodile's carcass was removed from the cage, and the staff began bringing in a new animal. The insolent guest scoffed, saying that seasoned people like him had seen all of this before. But the host insisted that the other party was gravely mistaken because the next animal was unlike anything they had ever seen before. As the animal began to emerge from beneath the floor, Xiao Tu immediately felt a chill run down his spine. He sensed that something bad was about to happen. The host immediately introduced that they had combined the wild instincts of a cat with the strength of a bear to create the perfect hunting machine. When the lights illuminated the monster, he proudly announced its name was Beast, the masterpiece of their company. Everyone started to panic when they saw the monster. Duduibang even boasted that the beast's only weakness was its excessive ferocity, as it would kill any human nearby, including the unfortunate employee who once tried to tie a bell around its neck. But Duduibang didn't care about human lives at all. After the beast finished eating, he asked who would be the first brave warrior. Meanwhile, Kyoto had a feeling that someone was plotting trouble here. And that person wasn't Duduibang, but rather a mole within his own group. But he decided to wait and see how things would unfold first. To motivate everyone, Duduibang doubled the reward compared to the original amount. Immediately someone volunteered to step into the cage, bringing a sword and attacking the beast. But the beast ignored him and suddenly leapt up to the ceiling, clawing fiercely at the supposedly unbreakable glass, giving everyone a real scare. Duduibang tried to reassure everyone that the glass was extremely sturdy, but when the beast rammed its head into it and cracked the glass, he started to get a bit nervous himself. Meanwhile, the guy who had just volunteered to go solo felt insulted, so he tried to ambush the beast from behind. But the beast was simply too fast. It dodged the attack and immediately took that guy out before he could even react. After that, the beast picked up the sword that had just been dropped and stared intensely at Duduibang, radiating a murderous intent as if it wanted to take revenge on its cruel master. It began to leap up, using the sword held in its mouth to strike at the glass ceiling. At this point, Duduibang had no choice but to call for backup, as he couldn't understand why the beast had gone so berserk. While he was still confused, Kyoto had already figured out that the cause was Dokpa Kim. During the fight with the crocodile, he had scattered some gold dust on the floor. At that time, only Kyoto noticed, and he thought it was just a combat support move, but now everything is clear. He did that to provoke the beast and manipulate the whole situation. Right at that moment, the beast broke through the glass and the entire auditorium descended into chaos. Especially Duduibang, because he knew all too well that this monster absolutely hated him. The beast charged at him, about to turn him into gold, but Modong suddenly appeared and kicked it away. Duduibang frantically thanked Modong for saving his life, then immediately turned and ran off in case the beast came after him again. Before leaving, he asked if he should call for reinforcements, but Modong refused, saying that ordinary soldiers would just be throwing themselves straight into the gates of hell. Meanwhile, over on Fat Kim's team, he pretended to be innocent and asked if this was part of today's performance. This was to divert any suspicion. However, Xiao Tu already knew that this team was behind everything. At the same time, Mumu quietly slipped away from the crowd. But Xiao Tu didn't call out to everyone because he needed to take advantage of the current chaos. Security was gradually becoming lax, so this was a good opportunity for him to steal the pure black liquor and make his escape. As Xiao Tu was leaving, Lura's special unit appeared and one member reassured everyone that they would soon take care of the ferocious beast. Immediately after, another person struck, slamming the beast's head to the floor, and finally it lost consciousness. Xiaotu was a bit disappointed because they handled everything so quickly, but then he realized that Moo still hadn't returned, which meant she really was up to something. Meanwhile, in the mansion's corridor, the security team had just received a report that an incident had occurred in the main hall, but it had already been handled by the order-keeping group, so there was no need to worry. Right at that moment, the corridor light suddenly went out, but the guards thought it was just an electrical short, so they didn't pay much attention. A few seconds later, one of the guards heard a noise from behind and turned around to check. At that moment, Muk attacked his teammates and immediately took him down. She locked both of them in the storage room before continuing her mission. To avoid being detected by the security cameras, she pressed a button to temporarily disrupt the system, then quietly slipped past the surveillance area. She continued down the elevator, then pried open the lower floor elevator doors with her bare hands. Behind that set of doors was another door that required biometric scanning. At this point, Muk put on gloves fitted with fake fingerprints to trick the system, thereby unlocking the vault containing the pure black liquor. Although she had been extremely cautious from the start, Muk was ultimately discovered by the security personnel. With no way to deny it any longer, she immediately drew her sword, ready to face them in battle. The security guard also drew his sword, and as the two clashed, it seemed that Muk was unable to overpower her opponent. There were moments when she was nearly struck by the blade, but thanks to the elders carrying their burdens, she narrowly managed to dodge in time. However, her hat was not so lucky. Right at that moment, a regular guard quietly approached her from behind and prepared to open fire. But Muk was not so careless as to be ambushed by a lowly soldier. She snatched the gun from him and sent him flying. She noticed another soldier approaching, so she used the unconscious body of the first guard to throw at the second one, then delivered a kick that took both of them out. She had temporarily dealt with the immediate problem, but because she was so focused on handling the soldiers, she completely forgot about the original enforcer. At that moment, he was about to stab her from behind. Right then, Xiaotu appeared and grabbed his arm tightly. Muk asked in surprise why Xiaotu was there, since he was supposed to be part of the plan. But he pretended not to understand what she was talking about at all. The enforcer immediately tried to use his face ID on Xiaotu, but of course, Xiaotu was much stronger. He easily blocked the punch, broke the man's arm, and knocked him out cold. Xiaotu even acted surprised that such a weak C-rank guy actually thought he was strong enough to take him on one-on-one. As for Moo, she was surprised to see him sizing up a C-rank like that. Even so, she was still curious as to how Xiaotu knew she was here. He simply replied that since he was her bodyguard, of course he always kept an eye on her during dangerous missions like this. He had also figured out that Moo was actually the one pulling the strings, while Fat Kim was just a front. He realized this because in their formation, Fat Kim was always at the front while Moo stayed behind, and if Fat Kim were truly the boss, there's no way he would let his bodyguard stand behind him. Moo admitted that Xiaotu had guessed correctly, but said that it didn't matter anymore now that the truth was out, because after all, the recent brawl had definitely attracted attention. The remaining security team could arrive here within the next 2 minutes. With only a little time left, Xiaotu told them they needed to quickly find the treasure before they got caught. But that's easier said than done. Moo had managed to sneak in this far, but it turned out this was just a front and she had no idea where the real treasure was. Xiaotu turned to her and asked, "Earlier you seemed very confident in your plan, right? So, did you already have an escape plan prepared?" Moo replied that she did. Hearing this, Xiaotu suggested that he would help her find the treasure, but in return, she had to let him escape with her. Moo agreed. But she couldn't help but wonder how Xiaotu could possibly know where the real treasure was if he had never been here before either. However, thanks to his spatial awareness, he was able to sense the room filled with treasure. At that very moment, he also sensed someone approaching from behind, so he quickly pulled Moo to hide behind the wall. Just a few seconds later, a hail of bullets rained down, so the enforcers had finally caught up to them. Qiutu sensed that the leader was about to make a move, so he immediately put on his glasses to get ready. The leader ordered her subordinate to hand her a stun grenade to distract the opponents. But just as she threw the grenade, Qiutu suddenly dashed out from the corner and used a baseball bat to hit the grenade back toward them. Thanks to that, he had enough time to pull Muk away and escape. However, not long after, they were surrounded once again by the enforcers. Muk tried to draw his sword but was blocked by the leader with a whip. Qiutu was about to rush in to help but was slammed headfirst into the wall by the big guy in the group. Meanwhile, Muk kept trying to hold out, but because they were outnumbered, she was eventually overpowered by the big guy. He shoved her hard into the wall right next to Qiutu. Qiutu remarked that with 3 against 2, they'd be lucky to get out with just a limp, but the leader didn't care. She said, "Either way, we're all going to end up on the altar anyway." Qiutu sneered and replied, "But you won't die alone." Then, out of nowhere, she threw a grenade. The whole security team panicked, thinking it was going to explode, but it turned out they'd been seriously tricked. Qiutu had only used it as bait so she and Muk could escape. They finally made it into a sealed room and destroyed the surveillance cameras so they couldn't be watched. But it was only a matter of time before they were tracked down again. Muk Muk thanked Teo-tu for saving her, but she also asked why he bothered to help her at all when it was clear he could have escaped on his own. Teo-tu replied that he still needed to gather information about Nyemla and Tu Koktan in order to find Tam Jiao. And since he was hired as a bodyguard, he couldn't just abandon her like that. In any case, they couldn't just stand around waiting for the cops to come to them, so Teo-tu said he already had a plan. A few minutes later, as the security guards were patrolling the hallway, Teo-tu suddenly stepped out and blocked their way. The leader seemed pleased that the prey had delivered itself right to their doorstep, but it also looked like she noticed that Muk Muk was no longer with him. Teo-tu said he had abandoned Muk Muk because bringing along someone as weak as her would only slow him down. The whole group was quite surprised that he would do such a thing, but in any case they couldn't let any intruder escape, so the leader ordered one of the group to go look for Muk Muk. And this was exactly what Teo-tu wanted. As soon as the third person left, Muk Muk immediately appeared from the ceiling. It turned out she had been hiding up there from the start and instantly leapt down to attack the leader. The burly guy in the group tried to ambush her from behind, but now that it was 2 against 2, Teo-tu could easily support Muk Muk and punch the guy straight into the wall while she also took down the leader. After defeating those two, they knew they had to leave quickly before the third person returned. Teo-tu led Muk Muk to the treasure room and tore open a hole in the wall so both of them could break in. Once inside, Muk Muk immediately found the ancient scroll she had traveled all this way to retrieve and declared the deal done on the spot. Teo-tu told her not to worry because electronic books are much more convenient now, and what he wanted was the black obsidian core. After he found it, the two of them got ready to leave. Teo-tu asked Muk Muk how she planned to escape, and she explained that there was a giant drainage pipe in the basement of the biotechnology lab. If they could get there, both of them could crawl out. It sounded simple, but Teo-tu felt like it was just some kind of weird Canadian nonsense. At the same time, the two security guards regained consciousness and were struggling to get up. Their master came over to see what was going on. After noticing they were badly injured, he realized they had been defeated without any hesitation. He ordered them to take some special pills and quickly go capture those two intruders. When she received word that the other side had recovered the corpse of the 17th beast, she asked if they should start collecting data, but the old professor didn't seem to care much. The beast was a failed experiment anyway, so there was no need to collect data from it. Only human test subjects were considered valuable by him. At the same time, the security forces on B2 level were informed that Xiaotu and Mumu were heading their way, so they gathered around the elevator and prepared to open fire as soon as the doors opened. Meanwhile, Xiaotu asked Mumu why they were going to B2 instead of heading straight to the lowest floor. But she said she still had something to do before escaping. She told Xiaotu that he could go ahead if he wanted, but since he was her bodyguard, he couldn't leave her alone. When they reached B2, Mumu took out a remote control and disrupted the surveillance footage in the elevator. Doing this would increase the chances that the guards would stumble upon the secret. She knew for sure that about a dozen guards were ready to open fire as soon as the door opened, but she had already mentally prepared herself to face them. Then she drew her sword and charged forward. Upstairs, the security personnel stood up and called the guards on B2 to get an update on Xiaotu and Mumu's situation. But it was too late. Mumu had already taken down all the guards. She told Xiaotu that there wasn't much time left, so she asked him to stay focused and showed him the building's map. They would head east until they reached the elevator that led down to the sewer system. Xiaotu thought the plan sounded pretty simple, but Mumu warned him that this floor was very dangerous and sooner or later the guards would catch up to them. However, Xiaotu didn't seem worried at all and set off, even though Mumu told him he was going the wrong damn way. The two of them walked across the floor and suddenly discovered a trail of blood leading to the door. Xiaotu started to get a little worried now, but Mumu put on her biometric gloves and opened the door for them to go through. He asked her if she was sure because he had a creepy feeling about whatever was waiting for them behind that door. But she still opened it, and inside was indeed an inhumane biotechnology research laboratory. Xiaotu asked why she brought him here. He thought they were heading toward the sewer system, but Mumu reminded him that he himself had said he wanted to stay by her side because he was her bodyguard. She explained that there was something she needed to check here, but they had to hurry before the guards found them. Xiaotu asked Mumu if she knew what kind of research was related to monsters like these. She explained that this laboratory was striving to create the most powerful biological monsters that humanity would never dare to imagine. Xiaotu was extremely surprised to learn that they were actually developing biological weapons here. She explained that everyone here was basically crazy, working because they believed they could turn life itself into the ultimate living weapon, but they didn't care at all about any risks or potential dangers. However, at least all the experiments here were conducted on animals. But deeper inside the laboratory was where the real nightmare took place. When they entered the lab, they saw many containment chambers with monsters inside, and discovered that there was even a research assistant taking notes on one of them. When the assistant noticed Xiaotu and Mumu, she calmly said that the professor was in his office. Xiaotu, confused, asked how the assistant could be so calm when two strangers had just broken in, but she replied that she and the professor were actually waiting for Mumu to arrive. The assistant went to inform the professor that Mumu had arrived, so he instructed her to transfer all the newly collected data while he went to meet Mumu. He came out to greet Mumu, but she wasn't there for small talk. She demanded that the professor hand over the gene therapy drug he had promised would cure her grandfather. She brought the treasure she had just obtained as ransom, just as the professor had requested. But before handing over the drug, she demanded that he prove it was truly effective. The professor recalled their agreement, but the problem was that he still didn't have the drug yet. Instead, he showed Muk Muk his research, which demonstrated that the human body could be significantly enhanced through hybrid DNA from different species. He had increased the DNA compatibility rate between species to 95% and was very close to achieving a scientific breakthrough. But then his research funding was cut. Muk Muk asked why the research was stopped when it had such promising prospects, and the professor replied that it was because of some human rights or ethical issues, but he never really cared about that. The only thing that mattered to him was that human experimentation could unlock the pinnacle of biological advancement. Kyoto was shocked to learn that the professor dared to use humans as subjects for his crazy experiments. But the professor saw nothing wrong with it. He even called it a necessary sacrifice in the pursuit of higher knowledge. When the professor's research is completed, he could eliminate all problems such as aging or disease. So, in order to realize that noble dream, what's the harm in experimenting on a few people? In fact, there are many other scientists conducting similar research, but none have achieved results like he has. Muk Muk was tired of hearing the professor's fanatical and delusional words, so she pushed him directly against the wall and demanded that he hand over the medicine to save her grandfather immediately. However, the professor insisted that the medicine was not ready yet. He said that if she handed over the treasure, he would have the funds to continue his research, and with just a few more human trials, he could produce the medicine she needed. Damn it, why didn't he just say that from the start and save everyone the trouble? Then Muk Muk lunged at the professor and started beating him up. She had already humbled herself to work with a pervert like him in order to save her grandfather, but now he was going back on his word and still wanted the treasure. She drew her sword, ready to send him to the afterlife, but the professor's assistant pulled out a gun and threatened to shoot if Muk Muk didn't let go. She wasn't afraid of the gun at all, but after hearing the assistant insult her as a useless centipede getting in the way of the professor's research, she let the professor go to teach the assistant a lesson instead. Muk Muk realized that she was the real fool for ever putting her hopes in the hands of this quack. Luckily, she still had another plan to save her grandfather. She planned to destroy this laboratory on her way out to put an end to the professor's research. While she was saying this, Xiaotu felt energy gathering in his chest, and a few seconds later, he was pulled into the cube space. Muk Muk asked Xiaotu to help her destroy the laboratory, but when she turned around, she saw that he had suddenly disappeared. She had no idea where he had gone, so she silently cursed the cowardly rabbit for abandoning her to escape on his own. But in any case, she still had to destroy the laboratory. As Muk Muk was leaving, the professor begged her not to do it, saying that this was his entire life's work and dedication. And all the experiments were like his own children that he had raised. But Muk Muk didn't bother to pay attention to the old professor's ramblings and left straight away. Inside Xiaotu's cubic space, he discovered that the system had finally started working again. It had just absorbed the black crystal essence and now had enough energy to restart. Xiaotu was overjoyed to hear the system's voice again. The system informed Xiaotu that the energy from the black crystal essence had upgraded his abilities. The storage capacity in his cube had increased by 5 meters and he could now teleport twice as far as before. He also acquired a new ability called Divine Blessing, which allowed him to temporarily share his powers, including teleportation, with others. Inside the base, Muk Muk released all the experiments created by the professor, hoping they would wreak havoc on the factory complex. Her plan worked very well because when the guards approached, they were attacked by a swarm of mutant bats. The captain ordered Zakas to deal with the bats because the soldiers couldn't handle them, and Zakas burned the bats to ashes with fire. The captain realized that these were the bats from the professor's laboratory, but she also didn't know how they had managed to escape. At that moment, Temon sensed an unusual source of power coming from inside the factory, so the captain warned everyone to be cautious. But Zakas still acted very arrogantly, even volunteering to lead the way. But just a few seconds later, a giant lizard suddenly dropped from the ceiling, and before Zakas could react, it tore his throat apart, killing him instantly. The captain was horrified to witness her comrade being killed and immediately ordered the soldiers to open fire on the lizard. However, its skin was so tough that the bullets had no effect. The lizard was about to lunge at another soldier for a mukbang, but the captain managed to tie it up with her whip just in time. The captain asked Cayman to step in and handle it, and he immediately agreed. While the lizard was being restrained, Cayman delivered a powerful punch that pierced through its chest. Meanwhile, Muk Muk was heading toward the exit, but unfortunately, when she turned, she found herself facing a dead end. According to the map, there should be a passage leading down to the sewers here, right? Before she could figure out what was happening, the remaining guards rushed out and attacked her. Mug Mug could defend herself, but without Tier 2 she had no advantage at all in a 2-against-1 situation like this. The captain asked Mug Mug if she had any last words before dying, but she remained silent and simply drew her sword to fight. The captain struck first and Mug Mug tried to dodge all the attacks, but in the end she was still subdued by the captain's whip. Mug Mug was almost completely restrained because the whip had a paralyzing effect, leaving her unable to move. Cayman ran over and punched Mug Mug so hard she saw stars. Even if she survived the first punch, at this rate one more hit and she'd be a goner. Before killing Mug Mug, the captain even thanked her for destroying the professor's laboratory because she actually hated that place too. The truth is, all these enforcers were kidnapped and brought here as children and the professor used them as test subjects. As a result, Cayman was left blind and the others had to endure unimaginable pain just to survive until now. Mug Mug replied that suffering is no excuse for whitewashing your actions. Netizens are no longer so easily manipulated. The captain scoffed that someone with a happy childhood wouldn't know a damn thing about this. After that she ordered Cayman to finish off Mug Mug. But before Cayman could strike, Xiaotu teleported in and knocked out the opponent. Xiaotu asked Mug Mug if she was okay, but she was furious because she almost died when he disappeared to who knows where. The captain was extremely confused and asked Xiaotu how he managed to get here, but instead of answering he warned her that a horde of monsters was on their way. The captain turned around and saw 2 lizard gods staring straight at her. Then she tried to play nice, coaxing Xiaotu to cooperate with them to defeat those monsters. However, he immediately pulled Mug Mug away and teleported them out of there. As for whether she lived or died, that was left to fate. Now the 2 of them are in the sewers. Mug Mug asked how he managed to get here so cleverly, but Xiaotu didn't want to reveal anything, so he just said it was a secret that couldn't be shared. Seeing that, Mug Mug didn't press further, but she emphasized that they needed to leave immediately. She put on the diving suit she had prepared earlier and got ready to go. Xiaotu asked if she had brought a diving suit for him as well, but she replied that he could use his own technique to get out. However, before they could make their escape, the final boss of the Ludra organization, with overwhelming combat power, suddenly appeared. That's the end of this episode. If you enjoyed it, please remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to wait for the next episode and support me. Thank you all so much.